East Asian relations sour, North Korea launches, and how to win a trip to Thailand. I'm Steve Miller. These stories and more are on the March 9th edition of Asia News Weekly. Hello everyone, I hope you're having a fantastic Sunday, and thank you so much for joining me this week. This is the first edition of Asia News Weekly, the new podcast format. It will borrow a little bit of the format from the Chi Ranger podcast as of late as we transition fully into ANW, but I'm looking forward to focusing more on the news. I have some new equipment, I have a new workflow, and I'm hoping that I can put out a better product, a better listening product for you each and every week. So what exactly is Asia News Weekly? Well, one of my passions is, of course, taking a close look at the news and sharing my opinion about it. So every week I will pick several stories that I think are perhaps the most interesting and that really aren't super time sensitive, and I'll include them here on the podcast. I'll give you the facts as well as my thoughts on them. And I'm hoping that after you listen to the podcast, you'll also share your thoughts with me, either through Twitter or on the podcast page. In addition, if there are some super time-sensitive stories, I'll make a special podcast and drop that in the feed as well. So keep your ears open. More news is coming. A shrine honoring An Jung-gung opened in China this past January. Now, I've mentioned before on the podcast how An shot and killed Hirobumi Ito on October 26, 1909, the very first governor of Korea. Now, South Korea views An as a hero and patriot, while Japan views An as a terrorist and has stated so when the museum was planned, saying that the opening was very regrettable. Seoul responded by saying that they cannot repress their astonishment that the chief cabinet secretary, who represents the Japanese government, makes such an irrational and ignorant comment. This clearly shows that Japan's governing power still has regressive historical perspective that beautifies and justifies the history of imperial invasion. Now, children here in South Korea are all taught about Mr. An, who is memorialized in books, movies, statues, and you can actually go out and buy various paper models. Now, these models, you can piece together the actual assassination scene where Mr. An shot down Ito at a train station. Now, emphasis is placed on the horrific actions of the Japanese during the colonial period between 1910 and 1945 and the noble actions of Mr. An. However, they may not portray the events and records in a neutral and objective view in terms of historic accuracy. While it is important to remember and memorialize important figures in history, it's also important to put them in the correct context. As much as Korea and China protest government officials visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, the one dedicated to An has a similar effect on the Japanese side, since from the Japanese perspective, Ito is viewed in very high regards as one of the founding members of modern Japan. It's important to realize that one nation's martyr is another's terrorist. And as long as neither side forgives the other, relations in East Asia will never match the closeness achieved in the West. It's this underlying resentment, this feeling of wrongdoing and ignoring the past that actually threatens stability here in East Asia more than anything else. And sometimes I just sound like a broken record time and time again. Here's one about South Korea possibly using a North Korean port. Now, South Korea may be able to use the North Korean port city of Rason for logistical purposes as early as next year, according to the Unification Ministry here in Seoul. In early February, South Korean companies paid an on-site visit to the Rason area. And if this cooperation project goes smoothly, major progress could take place around September of 2014. Now, this project is designed to develop Rajan, the northeastern North Korean port city that has been reintegrated into Rason, and it's really trying to be a logistics center linked to Russia's Trans-Siberian Railway. Now, in a summit meeting last November, South Korean President Park Geun-hye signed an agreement with Vladimir Putin to help South Korean companies join in the joint North Korea-Russia logistics project. Now, the companies from South Korea that are involved in this are Korail, the national rail line, POSCO, and Hyundai. The plan is to link the North Korean port with two major South Korean ports, specifically Pohang and Busan. Now, again, this is a bad idea. So this is a sign that Seoul, the United States, and Japan, their hard line against North Korea really isn't effective. Now, if this deal does go through, it once more reinforces that North Korea can continue to develop its weapons and nuclear programs without any repercussions. It's this overwhelming desire from South Korean lawmakers to unify and to help people in North Korea that actually hinders the stately behavior that most want to see from North Korea and Kim Jong-un. As a new generation takes office, it will really be interesting to see if things change. Because among the younger generation that I have spoken to, and in some recent polls, there are fewer South Korean youths that are able to really identify with those in North Korea. Now, everyone does want families who have been separated because of the war to be able to meet and spend time with one another. But there really hasn't been a really strong desire for reunification. As an idea, it's still very popular, but logistically, it just doesn't take hold. And if South Korea continues to try and develop business programs that will help North Korea, there just isn't any downside for North Korea to stop what it's doing. It's continuously being rewarded for bad behavior, and that's what needs to stop. Unfortunately, I do have two suicide stories from South Korea, which continues to highlight one of the challenges the society is facing. Now, the first story deals with a reality television show contestant committing suicide. The show in question, Jock, which translates to The Mate, and it's a matchmaking program that airs on SBS, which is one of the major networks. Now, the show films in Jeju, and what happens every week is 10 men and women are put in the same guest house. The guest house is then dubbed Love Town, and for 1 week, they are filmed by a television crew as well as surveillance cameras. So think of it as a matchmaking program, Big Brother style. And this contestant was being portrayed as the tragic girl, and she really felt bad about how she appeared to others. So she couldn't go on with her life and committed suicide. A second story, and this is, I think, really tragic. A mother and her 2 daughters all committed suicide in the face of mounting bills. And this is despite being eligible for government assistance. Now, the story goes, the father of the family recently passed away from a battle with cancer. And the mother, who was 60 or 70, actually had to quit her job because she fell down, hurt herself, and couldn't continue to work. Now, all this happened and they just couldn't keep up with the costs. So rather than asking for help, they chose to end their lives. Both of these stories have caused a stir in Korea because the government continues to struggle to find effective ways to reduce the number of suicides in the nation. Now, currently, we have, unfortunately, 50 suicides per day, or just about that number, and Korea still holds the dubious honor of having the most suicides of any developed nation, not only for adult populations, but for youths. Now, the problem really stems from this. Now, despite having programs that are available to individuals, there is such a stigma about asking for help, about losing face, about going to counseling, that people still feel afraid to do so. And that's the problem that the government isn't addressing. Unless the Korean government works with leaders to change public perception about asking for help, about going to counseling, this problem will never go away. There is so much pressure to succeed, to excel, to never walk away from failure, that your public perception is more important than how you really feel about yourself. Unless all of those things are taken into consideration, and as a society, you start worrying more about how you want to live your life rather than how you think other people perceive you and feel you should live your life, this situation is never going to progress. And far too many families will suffer. Vietnam and Malaysia are supporting the Philippines in its maritime dispute against China, specifically in the West Philippine Sea, says Vice President Jejomar Binay. Now, last year, China unilaterally redrew its maritime borders to include most of the South China Sea, and that erupted in a wave of criticism from not only the United States, but ASEAN nations, which found their internationally recognized maritime borders usurped by China simply because of their might. China is the major power in the region, and small countries like the Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam just can't stand up to them. Now, since this occurred, ASEAN nations have been trying to get China to meet in an arbitration to resolve the matter. However, China has refused to do this as a collective item, saying that they are only willing to discuss matters individually. It now appears that the members of the ASEAN community are finally starting to really work together to try and put some pressure on China. Now, it will only be the collective might of the ASEAN members, along possibly with the United States and Japan, that will bring China to the table. However, given that East Asian cultural norms require individuals and specifically nations to quote-unquote save face, it's unlikely that China will reverse its stance anytime soon, if ever. If a stalemate occurs, China could find itself using its navy to try and forcibly control the entire sea. As I've said several times on the podcast, it's this conflict, the control of the South China Sea, that really worries me. Despite the continued dispute with Japan, it looks like China is really trying to assert itself and control the region. And as more countries try to step up and fight back against China, it may be only a matter of time before we see some military conflict. We've seen a lot of action from North Korea recently. They've launched a number of Scud missiles in addition to several short-range mobile missiles. Now, Pentagon spokesman U.S. Army Colonel Steve Warren has said, "We've seen these types of missile tests fairly regularly, and it's short-range Scud missiles which they are allowed to test. Nevertheless, we always call on the North Koreans to refrain from provocative action." Now, as the colonel said, Many believe that North Korea is within their rights to fire these missiles. However, some have come out and said that firing any type of missile violates UN sanctions. Now, what's different about these last series of tests is mainly the way in which the press is reporting it. They aren't going hog wild and trying to stir up a lot of frenzy, a lot of fear regarding North Korea. But that may change. What exactly does the future hold? Unfortunately, it's been about a year since we've had a substantial launch, a long-range missile launch from North Korea. And since last April, they've really been working hard to improve their guidance systems, improve their missile technology, and improve the launch facilities. And I suspect that in the coming months, we will see a long-range missile test. It's also been more than a year since they've done and conducted a nuclear test. We saw through satellite imagery that the reactor has begun, and most analysts do believe that there will be a nuclear test in the near future. When that will occur, no one is quite sure, but I do suspect it will be within the year. And that is what we need to keep an eye on when either of those tests do take place. And I do use the word when because it's something that I do expect. I would expect also to see the same rhetoric from North Korea and the way that the press handles it. Hopefully it won't get as out of control as it did in 2013, but you never know. In some business news, the Chosun Ilbo analyzed investment figures tallied by the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy and found that Korean companies invested $290.5 billion in other parts of the world between 2004 and 2013, while foreign direct investment in Korea only amounted to just $126 billion US dollars. Now, Kim Dong-yeol at the Hyundai Research Institute said, if outbound investments had been directed at domestic facilities, we would have seen a creation of 650,000 manufacturing jobs. And many in the business industry are wondering why we don't have here in Korea more direct foreign investment. And I think the answer is pretty simple. It all comes down to ROI, or return on investment. You see, here in Korea, the wages are, I would say, high when you compare to other Asian countries, especially Southeast Asian countries. And Koreans work the most hours. They're the most eligible for overtime. And in the OECD, Koreans also have the lowest productivity rate. So as a business, as a company, where you're really looking at the bottom line and looking at your return on investment, why would you invest in Korea when you could do so elsewhere for far less money? If Korea wants more companies to invest here, they must address that particular issue, the wages and the productivity, to see more foreign investment. If Korea can increase productivity, investment will follow. One of the things I love about my job is that I get a great paycheck. And that paycheck allows me to travel throughout Southeast Asia, where my money goes a whole lot farther. This week on Take Me Away, we're going to be talking with Jeremy Foster about responsible tourism. Just take me away. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast, and I am very pleased to welcome back a friend of the show, someone who's been on before, none other than Jeremy Foster, the Travel Freak. Well, he's not the Travel Freak, but his site is called Travel Freak. Jeremy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
So, you've just returned from a massive trip around Southeast Asia. I was in Southeast Asia. Gosh, you know, I'm looking forward to this topic because since I was just in Thailand, we saw a little bit about this. But before we dive into the topic, please remind our friends at home what exactly you do.
Yeah, great. So I run travelfreak.net. I like to blog about transformative travel, the transformational power of travel, and all the adventures that come along with it. Everything from bungee jumping, skydiving, trekking in rainforests, to the general expansion of the mind that one goes through as they travel. And so those are the types of things that I love to go over on Travel Freak. I've been traveling for just about 4 years now, living a relatively nomadic lifestyle, working in the best cocktail bars that I can find. So that's been my form of travel and how I've been supporting myself through it.
Right on, right on. So this week we're talking about, responsible travel, especially in the Southeast Asian areas, because one of the things that I saw quite frequently when traveling around Thailand were advertisements for tours that had elephant trekking and feeding elephants and whatnot. And you're actually involved with a fundraiser to do something a little bit about that. So why don't you go ahead and share what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually spearheading a charity project. This is our second annual year. Last year we donated to an orphanage in Nepal, as well as an international organization that fights poverty through volunteering. And this year we're supporting an elephant reserve park in Thailand. And so we are a group of about 30 bloggers who have all banded together, travel bloggers specifically, and we've all banded together in an effort to both raise money for this elephant camp, or I should call it an elephant park rather, and also to raise awareness about responsible tourism, because the reason that we are running this fundraiser is because I think responsible tourism is a topic that a lot of people just glaze over. And so we are now approaching our goal, and we're hoping to smash it. We're about to raise about $5,000, and I just think it's really, really important for people to consider where their money goes when they travel. The world is a beautiful and incredible place to be, and there are lots of amazing things that one can do. And riding elephants in Thailand is something that a lot of people who go to Thailand love to do, because it's a great photo and it's an adventure activity, or it's just one of those things that people find exotic. But unfortunately, that's actually really, really detrimental to the elephants and the tourism industry as a whole on a much larger scale.
So that brings up an interesting topic, because you show up to your hostel, you show up to your hotel, and the first thing you see when you go in the lobby is this wall of brochures of what you can do in the area. And you'll see a tour package for a day in, say, Phuket or something. And usually the second or third thing on there is, we're going to go to see elephants, and you can feed the baby elephant, you can ride the baby elephant. But why is that something that people probably shouldn't do? What's the detrimental harm that is potentially falling on the elephant?
So that's a pretty multifaceted issue.
Okay.
And what it comes down to is that there's a really terrible breaking process that most elephants go through in order to domesticate them. So oftentimes elephants will be taken from their mothers when they're children, when they're little babies, and their mothers are often put to death, and then the baby elephants are starved and beaten, and it's this terrible process called fajan, and they will literally starve them and beat them until they are within inches of their life, and at that point they have broken their spirit, and so they learn to respond to fear. Allowing people to ride on the backs of an elephant. Elephants are wild animals. They are not meant to be. They're not meant to have these platforms that people sit on top of and have and have them carry them down a road or through the forest. That's that is not within the natural ability of an elephant, and so they're literally broken and they learn to respond to fear through the mahout, which is the word for the elephant tamer or the elephant master, and they use bullhooks to beat the elephants. And essentially, by riding an elephant, even though many people don't actually see this process because this is something that goes on behind the scenes, if you are spending money to go ride on the back of an elephant, you are actually, in a way, directly contributing and voting in support of that practice. And so we're trying to raise awareness so that people understand that there are other alternatives and there are ways to get a great photo with an elephant without riding it and without having to support that same practice at the same time.
So what is an alternative?
Well, the park in Chiang Mai, for example, that's actually who we're donating all the money that we raise to. They are the Elephant Nature Park. They're supported by the Save Elephant Foundation, and they rescue elephants from the tourism industry, elephants who have been giving tours and who have been disabled and have broken spines and have gone blind from getting hit in the face with bullhooks and things like that. This park rescues these elephants and shows them a better quality of life so that they can live out the remainder of their life responding to love rather than responding to fear. And so when I was in Chiang Mai, I went to the Elephant Nature Park and I got great photos in which I'm hanging out with elephants and literally running through fields and watching them roll around in the mud. And you can give an elephant a bath, or you can feed them bananas and melons and whatever else. And you can still get that great photo and interact with the elephants without having to sit on their backs. And so that is really the most responsible alternative. Sure.
Now, since we're starting to run out of time, let's talk a little bit about the charity project that you're involved in. So what exactly is it? Because I think it's fairly unique out there in terms of a way to generate some funds that goes to a worthy cause.
Yeah. So what we've done is as a collective group of about 30 people, we've leveraged our blogs to garner a quite a cool prize package. So everybody who donates is entered into a raffle. And that raffle is for a round trip ticket to Thailand. And we're offering a $3,300 tour, including airfare. So you get $2,000 towards flights to Thailand, plus a 7-night, 8-day eco-friendly tour around Thailand. And that's all paid for. We have Flight Network on board is sponsoring us, and Where Sidewalks End is an eco-friendly travel agency, and they'll be taking care of people on the ground. So essentially, a $20 donation could win you an all-expenses-paid trip to Thailand, and you can actually go and visit the park and see the elephants that you're donating to and helping to save.
Oh, that's awesome. And up until when can people donate?
We are doing, we're going to be drawing, I think we might leave donations open for a little while so that other people can still donate. But we're going to be drawing a name for the raffle on March 15th.
All right. So now this podcast is going out 1 week prior to that. So if you're watching the video on YouTube, downloading the MP3 from either chiranger.com or iTunes, you only have about a week to donate. So make sure, if this is something that is near and dear to your heart and you want to take advantage of the potential prize package, you got to get on the ball. And of course, as usual, all the links are over in the show notes over on chiranger.com. So since you're no longer in Southeast Asia, before we went on the air, we were talking about how much we love that area. Do you think that you'll be heading back that way soon, Jeremy?
Oh, yeah, definitely. For sure. I don't know if I'll make it over in the next year or so, but it's definitely a place that I hold dear to my heart. I miss the food. I miss the people. I miss the lifestyle. It's such a beautiful place to be.
Very cool. Well, Jeremy, thank you for joining us this week on the podcast. You can keep up with Jeremy and everything he does by following him on Twitter and his blog. Those links are, as I said, in the show notes over at chiranger.com. So, Jeremy, thank you once more.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I will just point out the address if you guys do want to donate. The address is www.travelbloggingcalendar.com.
Cool. And as I said, those will be in the show notes. So I'll be back in just a second. Thank you again for joining me this week. For more information about any of the stories mentioned, please check out the show notes at chiranger.com. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. So please leave your comments on the podcast page or drop me a line at podcast@chiranger.com. If you're an iTunes user, I hope you'll also consider leaving some feedback there. Now, every day I share pictures and video from my life and travels, so if you want to see them and see what life is like in Asia, be sure to follow me on Twitter. You can find me at ChiRanger, that's at QI-Ranger. Well, that's it for this week's episode, so until next time, stay true to yourself and always be awesome. Asia News Weekly is written and produced by Steve Miller and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Morning Blue was written and performed by Josh Woodward.